All right, I'm in John chapter 2. This is the Gospel of John, chapter 2. In chapter 1, Jesus picked up a few disciples, and in the previous message, I spent a lot of time talking about some of the unique things that were going on with regards to selecting the disciples, his conversation with Philip, and I said a number of things that could not be absolutely concrete necessarily, but I think it gives you a pretty good idea of what was going on. And just to give you an example with regards to how it can be a good thing if you know a little bit more about the background and the history of Judaism and of course the law. All right, so after this conversation that Jesus had with Philip, we go into chapter 2 in the Gospel of John, chapter 2. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now, both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. All right, so Jesus picked up a few disciples, and then about 3 days later, they are invited to attend a wedding. So they go to a wedding. Hey, why not? It's a wedding party. So they go and participate in the celebration that's happening over there. And in verse 3 it says, and when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Now, if you think about that for just a minute, that's not really a request. That's more like an announcement. Looking at Jesus, they have no wine. And of course, this could be in the tone of, I am informing you of the change that has happened here, but I'm not necessarily expecting you to do anything. It could be said in that tone, "Oh, look, they ran out of wine. They ran out. Isn't that interesting?" Or it could be said in the tone of, "Hey, they ran out of wine. So you should do something about this." All right? Now remember, his mother did have some special knowledge about Jesus. She had some special knowledge about him, and this is described in the Gospel of Luke, that there was a miraculous event, that the conception and the giving birth of Jesus was a miraculous event, and so this was something that his mother knew about, that he would have some uniqueness to him, and she would know about the public proclamation. By now, she would know about the public proclamation and the testimony of John the Baptist that he is considered to be the Messiah. He's got a few disciples there. Now the people who are there at the wedding are, of course, quite active in their celebration, and it does not appear that Jesus is drawing a lot of attention from a lot of people. So at this point, he would be considered to be kind of a small novelty at best in that sense. He's just getting started. If he was to attend a wedding a year or two later, then I'm sure that the situation would be a little different, because he enters into the presence of all these people. Just because he's present there, that would change the social and the relational dynamics of the group of people, which would just happen by default. All right, so his mother brings this up and mentions it to him. She knows that he's got some uniqueness to him, and it appears that she is presenting this problem to him with a subtle request that he do something about this. So Jesus said to her in verse 4, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." All right, so in the way that she said it in a way that apparently it was a concern. And she was speaking with him about this concern in a tone that she expected him to do something about this. And he says, "Hey, what does your concern have to do with me? This doesn't have anything to do with me. I was just invited. I was not brought here for the purpose of ensuring that nobody ran out of wine here. I'm not the heavenly wine supplier. That's not why I'm here." And so Look, I can understand that you have this concern. Good for you. Thank you for the notification. But I am not necessarily going to embrace this concern for myself. All right, now Jesus is older now. He may be her son, but he's a man. And, one of the expected characteristics of a man and the expected change in relationship between a man and his mother is that she is not going to be giving him orders concerning what he's going to do or not do in his life. He's going to be totally independent. And so she's not going to relate to Jesus in the sense of, hey, they're out of wine. This is a concern that I have. You fix this. You fix this. I order you, to fix. You're not going to have that happen. If she did, then the conversation might be a little different. But something to the effect of no. But this is something to notice about the relationship between Jesus and his mother. That she's not going to order him around. She's not going to expect him to solve the problems of life. That he's going to only assume those issues and concerns that he thinks are important. But he has been notified that there is a problem, all right? That there is a lack of wine. He has been informed of this. She tells the servants to do whatever he says. She doesn't tell him to do whatever she says. She tells the servants to do whatever he says. And that's because they are servants. They are there for the purpose of following the instructions of a certain group of people. And it appears that his mother had tremendous influence in this household for some reason, which is not described. So his mother, in verse 5, his mother said to the servants, whatever he says to you, do it. All right? And that would be appropriate. She should not be talking to him in that manner. But she can speak to the servants in that manner while the servants are there in this circumstance assisting with the wedding festivity. That would be their role, all right? So this is the situation. Jesus has been informed, and he decides to do something. It is his decision, and the outcome of this decision is not for the purpose of making a public proclamation. You keep reading, and you discover that the result of this is not some kind of overwhelming public proclamation here at the festival. It's kind of a private miracle. All right, beginning again in verse 6, it says, now there were set there 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. Jesus said to them, fill the water pots with water, all right, which tells you that they were not likely filled with water. They were probably empty. And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, draw some out now and take it to the master of the feast. And they took it. When the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom, and he said to him, every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior. You have kept the good wine until now. This beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed him. He manifested his glory, but to who? All right, to who? Was this a miracle that he performed at the wedding feast, and then everybody at the wedding, now everybody's attention is going to turn away from the bride and the bridegroom, from the couple who are married. We're going to take all of our attention off of them, and we're now going to put it on Jesus, because he's the Messiah, and he just performed a miracle. Now, we got to find out a little bit more about this guy who can turn water into wine. That is not what happened, or at least we don't have that recorded here. What we have is we have a circumstance where Jesus performs a private miracle, And the result is that his disciples will believe in him. And I'll come back to that in just a minute. All right, and so there were these water pots, and there were six. There were six of them with that could hold about 30 gallons of water. They were stone. These were pretty high quality water pots in this sense. And they apparently were empty. All right, which means that there were quite likely a lot of people there. The water would be set aside for when people arrived. When they arrived, the ritual purification was not really that much of a ceremony. I mean, it was kind of a ceremony, but what you would do is you would go to the water pot, and there would be a cup with two handles, and you would dip the cup into the water, and then you pour it over one hand and grab it with that hand and pour it over the other, and then again the other hand. And this was the ceremony or the ritual of washing your hands as was given by the Pharisees, as if it was a law to cleanse your hands before you were going to eat a meal. It's not really in the Mosaic law, but that's what people do. And so there apparently were a lot of people there for these pots to be relatively empty to the extent where Jesus would say they need to be filled up. All right, and so those were the pots, and that was the ceremony, and there was a transformation that took place, and this was a miraculous transformation. And there are a number of people who might find this to be a little awkward. They're thinking, well, what kind of wine is this? I mean, is it just grape juice? Because we don't necessarily want to suggest that Jesus produced alcohol, and a really good quality, I mean, this was some good alcohol, some really good quality wine. Did he do that? Or did he make grape juice, that didn't have any alcohol in it at all? Well, that wouldn't even happen necessarily because of the yeast in the air, the metabolism that would take place, the transformation that would take place from the yeast that's just in the air by itself. Alcohol will form within grape juice really fast, and if it doesn't form really, really fast before you eat that grape, before it manages to produce some alcoholic content, then it will within your digestive system before you're done with it. There will be alcohol there. I mean, it's biologically, it is impossible to avoid the alcohol. In fact, if with the way that our physiology is, if we do not consume alcohol, our bodies will automatically manufacture it because it's necessary for certain metabolic processes. I'm not saying that to encourage you to drink alcohol. I personally have never been drunk in my life, and I have no intention of even coming close to it. That's just me. But but in this case, yeah, Jesus definitely produced wine, and while there are a lot of Christians throughout the history of Christianity who have protested the consumption of any alcohol whatsoever, they've had to find some interesting ways to navigate through these verses and go through some gymnastics in order to get through them without trying to suggest that Jesus didn't really produce alcohol. And it just doesn't make any sense, all right? And within the Jewish culture, if you have a wedding, you have a festivity of some kind, you do not have alcohol in that way, if you don't have wine, then in many cases it would be considered to be inappropriate. I mean, it would be expected that you have the presence of some wine there. And this goes along with some of the laws. For example, the law of tithing does require you to spend your tithe while you are delivering it to Jerusalem. And there are lists of, there's descriptions about the things that you are expected to purchase to include strong drink. And that is a translation of a Hebrew phrase that means drink alcohol to the point of intoxication. And that if you don't do that, then you are not properly observing the law of the tithe concerning how you deliver your tithe to Jerusalem. All right, you can look that up yourself. It would be a good exercise for those of you who are not familiar with the concordances and the tools that we have at our disposal to do research through the law. All right. Okay, so this is what's going on. And when Jesus turned the water into wine, we have in verse 11 again, this beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. All right, his disciples believed in him. This was somewhat of a private miracle of the manifestation of his glory. It wasn't as though he was invited to a wedding and he thought, hey, here's my chance. A nice public event in a sense. Let's go to the wedding and I will manifest my glory at this couple's wedding. That's not what happened, all right? It was a subtle and a private experience, and his disciples believed in him. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that they didn't believe in him before? It doesn't mean that. It just means that they believed in him differently. All right? That's what it means. And it doesn't mean that now they believe in him and that there's not going to be any change in the future. They will probably believe in him differently later. All right? It's important to see this. It's not as though Jesus selected the disciples. He brought them to this wedding. And his disciples, they were mature Christians. They were well discipled, and they knew all of the mysteries of God. All right? It wasn't like that at all. That's not what was going on. Okay, they did not have it all together just right away, just instantly, because they were hanging out with Jesus. Sometimes people will tend to give that kind of an impression, and it just wasn't the case. They believed in him because he turned the water into wine, but they already did believe in him a little bit. It's not like they didn't believe in him at all. It just means that there was a change. There was an increase in terms of how they would believe in him. They would trust in him a little bit more. They would have a deeper connection with him, a higher regard for him, a deeper respect for him. They would see him a little differently than how they saw him before. And this would be expected to change again later on as they spend more time with him, as he conducts his ministry. There will be changes. There will be growth. And when his ministry was over, that didn't mean that their growth and change and maturity and beliefs would stay the same either. As we live our lives, we continue to grow, we continue to change. And we can see that in the book of Acts. We can see some transitions that some of the disciples went through as they discovered more and more about the implications of what Jesus accomplished. All right, and so this was a big deal for them. It was a private miracle. It was a big deal for them. And then what happens? Then they go to Jerusalem. All right, and that might have been a point of hesitation. When Jesus says, hey, let's all go to Jerusalem together, they might think, well, maybe not. You've been kind of interesting. But we think we'll hang out here, or maybe we'll go later. But now that they saw this one little miracle, this would give them an increase in enthusiasm to go to Jerusalem with Jesus. In verse 12, after this, he went down to Capernaum, he, his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they did not stay there many days. And I can understand why. You think about his brothers were there, right? I mean, these are the guys who later on tell him, hey, why don't you go to Jerusalem and get yourself killed? We'll come back to that in a later chapter. And so if he's got his disciples with him and his brothers with him, the conversations that would take place between his disciples and his brothers probably would be interesting. His disciples would go to his brothers and say, hey, you know Jesus all your life, right? Or just about. You know him pretty well, don't you? Tell us about him. What do you think? And they say, yeah, we don't like him. we We don't like him. What are you doing following this guy? We don't like him. We're not going to follow. So he's with us right now, but that's because we're all going home. That's what we're doing. So that conversation was probably a little bit interesting. For them to not stay there many days would make sense. Going to verse 15, or for verse 13. In verse 13, now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And he found in the temple those who sold oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers doing business. That's verse 13 and verse 14. Okay, John chapter 2, verse 14. There is a lot of business going on there in the temple. All right, you've got a number of things happening here. You have animals being sold, and you have currency exchanges taking place. It'd be really helpful to understand what these two things are about. Okay, the first thing, let's talk about or consider the animals that are being sold. Okay, why are they being sold there at the temple? Well, it turns out that according to the law, if you're going to present an offering there at the temple, a sacrificial offering in accordance with the Mosaic law, then you are expected to bring an animal without blemish. Okay? And the priesthood who is there in order to supervise everything, they're going to inspect whatever animal you bring. Okay, and on the Passover, you're expected to bring your Passover lamb, as an example. It was the Passover. So you're going to bring your lamb into the temple, and the priests are going to inspect this lamb that you have brought to make sure that they can't find anything wrong with this lamb. Now, these priests are operating under the authority of the high priest. In this case, it's Annas. And Annas was appointed by the Romans. Annas was not considered to be the high priest according to the people, but the Romans, who had power there, they put Annas in the position of the high priest, and they had him as the person of authority there in the temple. And of course, his loyalty was to the Romans. All right? They put him in power. His loyalty is to them. If he does not comply with what they expect or require, then they'll just replace him with somebody else. There was another person. His name was Caiaphas, and he was the legitimately recognized high priest according to the lineage of the Levites and in the order of Aaron. The people recognized him as the official high priest, and he did have some influence there in Israel. But Annas was in charge. He was in charge because he had the enforcement power that was given to him by the Romans, and so people did what he wanted them to do. And one of the things that he did was he corrupted what was going on there in the temple. He corrupted it for his own personal self-interest, which of course the Romans were in favor of, because through the corruption it would degrade the quality of the society as a society of Israel. It would degrade it. It would break it down a little bit. The Romans would find it easier to rule and govern over the region because of the corruption that was happening within the governmental infrastructure there of the Israelites, of the Jews. All right, so the breakdown and the corruption was welcomed by the Romans because it gave them an increase in power and authority. The way that Annas managed the temple was that he effectively turned it into a business. That's what he did. He turned it into a business where he would buy and sell things for a profit. Let's consider the animals first. For the animals, the priests who worked for him, who, if you're there at the temple, you are working for the high priest, Annas, who has all the authority there in the temple. And your job is to acquire animals that can be sold as pre-approved animals that have already been inspected and are considered to be without blemish. Right? So the priests would would need to acquire these animals. That would be part of their task, is to go and purchase animals that would be used for sacrifices. And then they would sell. The priests would also, or other priests perhaps, would sell these animals to people who would come to the temple. They would sell them and this is what it would look like, especially on Passover. People could travel for days, even, especially if they're coming from Galilee, they could travel for days to make it there to the temple. They would have selected their lamb on the 10th day of the month. They're going to sacrifice it on the 14th day of the month. They bring their sacrifice to the temple, and the priest looks over their animal, their lamb, and says, hey, you know what? This is not acceptable. I see a little blemish over here. I think, and you know what I think matters, because I'm the one who is in authority here, and I can accept or reject your offering. And I have decided that I'm going to reject your offering. And you could think, well, gosh, now I'm in big trouble. I mean, I got to have a lamb for Passover. I've got to do it, or I am violating the law of God, And so what's the solution? Well, it just so happens, the priest will say, it just so happens that we have a pre-approved lamb right over here that will help you with this particular problem that you now have. And, it's kind of expensive. As you can probably tell, there's a big demand for lambs that will pass the inspection. There's a big demand for those. And so the cost for this lamb is probably going to be a little higher than what you would expect. And that's how they would make their money, all right? The priests would then make a profit on the difference between the purchase price of the lamb and the sale price of the lamb. They might double, triple, quadruple their money. They could make a pretty good difference in profit, and that's what was going on. That was the operation there at the temple. And of course, the people were not in favor of this. The people would be very much disturbed by this, all right? But, what are they going to do? They either just go home and not participate, or if they want to participate, then this is what they have to do this. And so that was what was going on with regards to the sale of the animals. Okay, now what about the currency exchanges that were happening? Well, the law is very explicit about the currency being the shekel. The shekel was the currency that was defined by God as the currency that would be used there for all the activities in the temple. And on Passover, people were expected to bring a half shekel temple tax, and in order to pay the tax and in order to engage in the other activities, such as if you wanted to buy a Passover lamb, or whatever, you're going to have to exchange your currency. If you're using the Romans currency, you're going to have to exchange that currency for the temple currency. In order to make that exchange, you're going to have to give them some extra money, all right, to pay for that exchange, to pay for the person to provide the service of weighing things out and making the exchange. That person has to make a living too. They're going to spend their day there at the temple providing this service. They need to be paid for their labor and for their efforts. Also, what are they going to do with the currency? They're going to have to go and figure out what its value is to them. Okay, this was all headed up by the high priest, and he was in control of all of this. And the difference in the currency exchange was also a source of profit, a source of money for the priesthood, mainly for the high priest. So there was a lot of money being made there in the temple, and it was done in this manner, which technically would be considered to be inappropriate. All right, this is inappropriate. But that's what was going on, and there was nothing that the people could do about it, because the only thing that could be done would be the removal of Annas as the high priest, and for them to put another high priest in position of power, which may have been Caiaphas, but who knows if he would have run the operation there any differently. And the Romans would not allow that to happen. They were the ones who appointed Annas to be there as the high priest. So Jesus walks into the temple with all of this going on. That's what happens. Jesus walks in, and he decides to make an issue out of this. He decides to create a disturbance. All right? Now there's great risk in him performing a disturbance, or of him making a disturbance. There's great risk because the officers who are there could very well arrest him for making a public disturbance, and he could be punished for the disturbance that he causes. All right? But the main reason why they don't do that is because of the public. That's what happens mainly. It's because of the public, because the public is totally in favor of what it is that he is doing. Also, in the way that he does it, this probably has never happened before. Okay? And the confusion would be intense. All right? There would be a lot of confusion. What do we do about this guy? This has never happened before. They never expected this to happen. And all the disturbance would have created so much confusion that Jesus would have been able also to walk out of there without being arrested, just because everybody would be in so much shock, concerning what he did. So what did he do? In verse 14 again, and he found in the temple those who sold oxen and sheep and doves and the money changers doing business. When he had made a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money and overturned the tables. And he said to those who sold doves, "Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise." Then his disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house has eaten me up." All right, and then we'll look at what the Jews said to him after this. All right, so it wasn't as though he picked up a few strings off the floor and then just sort of wave them around a little bit. All right, in order to move an ox and the sheep and to turn over tables, and in order to be so much of a threat to people that Jesus could perform this disturbance effectively, right? He's going to have to pick up some pretty good quality or pretty heavy duty ropes, in a sense. He's going to have to make a pretty good sized whip and be reasonably skilled with this in order to wield that whip in a way that he will cause pain when he strikes people and an ox, and these animals. When he strikes people and the animals and kicks over tables and stuff, he is going to have to be quite aggressive with this in order to fulfill what's described here, all right? And so this was not a small event, and like I said, this would create more than enough confusion that he would not be arrested immediately, and he could reasonably walk out. And when you consider how disturbed the people were, to include the guards of the temple, they would have had to comply with the expectations of the law also. And are they going to get a special discount on a Passover lamb because they work there? Maybe, but even so, still they know about the corruption, and they're not necessarily going to do something unless they absolutely have to. Okay, so in verse 18, so the Jews answered and said to him, "What sign do you show to us since you do these things? What sign do you show to us since you do these things? All right, you're gonna come in here and create this big disturbance. You had better give us some kind of sign from God that says that you have the authority to do these things. All right, something. You're gonna have to give something that says that you have the authority to cause this kind of a disturbance. That's how they view this. And what is he going to say? Is he going to say, the Romans sent me in here to cause this disturbance? That's not going to happen. All right? And so they confront him, and that's where their head is at. All right? Their head is in this space of, look, if you're going to confront us, you had better have some credentials. You'd better have some recognized authority of some kind, because we're here because we have the authority of the Romans, all right? Because the Romans appointed the high priest Annas, and it was his operation. So they said, we have the authority of the Romans to do all of this in the temple. What authority do you have to cause this disturbance and to disrupt what we are doing? Now, how do you have a conversation with a person like that? I mean, really, you go into the temple of God. And in this case, Jesus goes as a representative of God. All right, and he's got something to say about what's going on here. But the people who are in power there, they say, well, you don't have any right. You, the representative of God, you have no right to be here. You have no authority here. You have none of that. You don't belong here. Why? Because, the Romans did not say that you could be here and do this. But they said we could be here and do this. You can't have a productive conversation with these people. All right, sure, fine. They're in charge. They have the power of the sword. They're in the temple. Good for them. All right, good for them. So that's what they've got. All right, but you're not going to be able to have a productive conversation with these people and say, this is wrong. Do not do it anymore. That's just not going to go anywhere. Okay, it's not going to go anywhere at all. So Jesus answered. Nice of him to at least answer. He answered and said to them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Now his answer, his response is such that, look, if you want to kill me, you go right ahead, because in 3 days I will resurrect from the dead. And that's about all you can do with these folks. You guys want to exercise your authority? You want to take my life away? You go right ahead. And in 3 days after that, I will resurrect from the dead, and the new life that I will have afterwards will be greater than the life that I have now. So what are you really threatening me with? Nothing but greatness, all right? Goodness. Absolutely. Come and destroy me. You go right ahead. Because my life will be so much better after you're done, after that, or whenever you're done. All right, that's all he can do with these people is say, all right, look, you have the authority. You want to use your authority, go ahead and use it however way you want. If you destroy this temple, if you destroy, Jesus would be saying, if you destroy me, if you cause any harm to me, you can go right ahead and something greater will happen. Now, what he's referring to here is that he would resurrect from the dead 3 days after he is crucified. And he speaks about this again later when he talks about Jonah and being in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights. This was described in Matthew, and so this is a theme, and this is a presentation. This is an opportunity for him to mention this to the people, but they certainly would not understand what he was talking about until after he resurrected from the dead. And so this is why John is able to record it here, as he would remember that this is something that Jesus said this early in his ministry. Then the Jews said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" All right, so they're thinking that he's talking about the building. And he's not. To him, the temple was not the real temple. He was the real temple. The Holy Spirit was within him. It was not in the Holy of Holies. It was not in the most holy place there at the temple. The Spirit of God was not there. The Spirit of God was in him. And because the Holy Spirit of God was within him, he was the temple of God. That temple that they'd been working on for 46 years was not the temple of God. They thought it was, but it wasn't. He spoke to them as if it was, but it wasn't, in order to engage in a productive conversation with them. He was the temple of the Holy Spirit. And this is important to recognize as well, that when you are saved, when you are born again by the Spirit of God, when the Holy Spirit comes to take up residency within you, comes and dwells within you, when you are made spiritually alive through the indwelling presence of the Holy Spirit, you become the temple of God. All right? It's very important to recognize. So they respond to him by saying, well, it took us 46 years to build this, and you say we could destroy it and you could build it back up in 3 days? Right? What does Jesus say? Nothing. Okay? He does not respond to that. He does not answer that question. There is no communication taking place between Jesus and these people, and he recognizes that. That's what he does. He simply recognizes that. And in verse 21, but he was speaking of the temple of his body. Therefore, when he had risen from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this to them, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had said. Okay? Verse 23, now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover, during the feast, many believed in his name. Many believed in his name. All right, so, well of course they would, right? Not because he necessarily because he showed up in the temple and he caused a disturbance, even though a lot of people would be happy about that. That doesn't necessarily give him any credentials or any authority. They probably would believe in his name because of the testimony of his disciples and because the word that would be getting around concerning what happened with John the Baptist. If you were to have a conversation with his disciples, for example, and ask his disciples, why do you believe in Jesus? Why do you believe in him? Well, this could be their response. John the Baptist said that he is the Messiah. So I believe in Jesus because John the Baptist said so. That's why I believe in Jesus. He says he's the Messiah. So he's the Messiah. That's why we believe. Because of the testimony of John the Baptist. Oh, also, when we were at a wedding, Jesus turned water into wine. He did. We saw it. We saw it. We know he did that. That's why we believe in Jesus. Here, we got a guy who can turn water into wine. You want some wine? He can do it. He can make it from water. Just say the word. So we have John the Baptist who says he's the Messiah. He can make alcohol on demand. So this is why we believe in Jesus. Okay, that's not a lot to go on. All right, but don't worry. They got more time. There'll be more. Okay, more miracles, more signs, more things. Jesus has a lot to say. There will be a lot more to go on. But there were a lot of people who believed in him because of the testimony of John the Baptist. He turned water into wine. He created a disturbance in the temple and got away with it. So, he can now develop a following, right? He's got people who are interested in him because of the testimony of somebody else, and because he can produce alcohol, and because he can cause a riot and get away with it. Now, the people might be very excited about Jesus. This sounds like a great guy. We want to have a relationship with this guy. We believe in him. We want to be connected with him. We want to be a part of his life. We want him to be in our life. Absolutely. All right, but is this what Jesus would want? If you were Jesus, is this what you would want people to be in your life because this is how they saw you? They see you as a person who will provide them with as much alcohol as they would like. And they see you as this person who will cause a disturbance and get away with it. Okay? No, all right? He wants people to have a relationship with him for other reasons than that. For other reasons. And this is why he did not commit himself to them. Right? They may have been very excited about him, very interested with him. Oh, Jesus, hey, you're the man, you're the guy, absolutely. And what's he going to do with that? He's just going to wave maybe and walk away. All right? Just walk away. Because that is not going to be the kind of relationship that he really wants to have with somebody. That they look at him as a person who provides them with things that they can't get for themselves, or who will give it to them in a way that they won't have to work as hard for it, who will just create disturbances with people they don't like. This is not the foundation of a good quality personal relationship. It just isn't. And so he did not commit himself to them. And you might wonder, well, where does that come from? What does that mean? He doesn't commit. Isn't it all about us committing ourselves to Jesus? That's kind of the message. You had better surrender to Jesus. Give your life over to Jesus. Commit yourself and your existence to Jesus. You do that. I probably could try to change my tone a little bit and produce some kind of great sermon about enthusiastically commit yourself to him. But does that mean that he has an interest in committing himself to you? You probably never think about that. That maybe he has some feelings on this matter. Maybe he has some ideas concerning what this commitment is going to look like. And instead, people try to impose their views, their ideas about the way this relationship between God and them should be. And after a while, they start to wonder, something seems to be wrong. I don't seem to be getting God to respond to me. He's not blessing me. He's not. He doesn't seem to be in my life. I'm not hearing from God. He's not answering my prayers. I don't understand. There's something's wrong here. And you know what's wrong? You. All right, you. He decided that he didn't want to participate in this religious stuff that you wanted in your life. It doesn't mean that he's going to be a part of that. All right? You can construct this whole religious thing in your existence, but it doesn't, and you may commit yourself to that for years, for decades, maybe your whole life, and it doesn't mean that he's going to want to be a part of that. That's a big assumption that people quite often make. And that's what we have here at the end of chapter 2, is the expression of that. The end of chapter 2, again in verse 23, now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover, during the feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs which he did. But Jesus did not commit himself to them, because he knew all men, and he had no need that anyone should testify of man, for he knew what was in man. He knew what was in them. He knew what they were about, that they were just interested in what he might do for them. And on that basis, he just wasn't interested in committing himself to them. Oh boy, I'm so excited that I have a person who wants to be in my life because of what I will give to them. That's what I am. I'm this person who just gives to them. They're willing to commit to that. And because I perform these signs, maybe they can get a piece of the action. And that's why they're here. And you want me to commit myself to these people? What kind of a relationship is that? It's a very one-sided relationship, a very one-sided experience. All right? So it's something to think about. It's something to consider. That Jesus has some views about the kind of relationship that he wants to have with other people. And it is worth the time and the effort to think about. What kind of a relationship would he really like to have with you? Because if you've got your own ideas about the kind of relationship you'd like to have with him, well, those ideas might not be the same as his. They just might not be. And what he thinks does matter. It does. And if you don't believe that, just give it a little bit more time and you'll discover that what he doesn't want to participate in, he doesn't participate in. He will just walk away. And that's what he did here. He just walked away. Jesus did not commit himself to them. He showed them the signs. He'll do that. And they believed in him to a certain extent. And that's better than nothing. It is good, all right? I don't want to take that completely away. There is goodness there. But there is a long way to go from there. There is more to do, more to go on. So it's a start, and in that sense, it's a good thing. But if you want Jesus to commit to these people in a relational context, we got a long ways to go for that. All right? So that will be the end of my presentation on John chapter 2. In the next message, I will go ahead and get right into John chapter 3 with regards to the conversation with Nicodemus, and there is a lot that I can share with that. So this was mainly just a transition to show that Jesus has a private proclamation of himself as the Messiah, and then a public proclamation of himself as the Messiah. People are starting to believe in him, but only in a limited way, in a small way, and it's not yet even close to what the Lord Jesus would really like. But it is a start. It is a reasonable beginning. So for those of you who are in some small groups, who are using these messages for small groups, I got a question for you that you could consider using in your conversation. What were the first things you believed about Jesus? What were the first things that you believed that got you started? Okay, with these folks, hey, Jesus turned water into wine. He did something exciting. He did a miracle. You believe that he did it. And that's a start. That's the first thing to believe. He did some other things while he was there in Jerusalem, some other signs that would show that God was with him. Those are good things. And so what were some of the things that you learned about, that you discovered, that you believed, that got you started? That got you started in this journey of committing yourself to God, of committing yourself to Jesus. It would not necessarily mean that he's going to commit himself to you, but at least moved you in that direction. What were some of those things that got you started, that got your attention, that began your journey to get you to where you are right now? All right, I think that's a good question to consider and to see that, probably some of the strangest things are good, that they're great things because they move people in a direction that eventually gives them the opportunity to be saved and to grow in a real healthy relationship with their God. All right, I'll continue with John chapter 3 in the next message.